Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to once again another episode of Crypt I've been thinking. I want to thank you all for joining me again. Having a great time, as I say every time I do one of these. I have a great time interviewing people. Something I really much enjoy doing, and it's something I enjoy doing on a lot of different topics. And as you all know, people who've been watching my channel, there's one topic that I really enjoy discussing. It's a topic that I've been following for years, and that is the David Crowley murder, suicide. But let's be fair, some are saying that he did do it, and there's definitely a side saying that he didn't do it. And to be honest, I'm still in the middle. I've been researching this now, taking people's advice, saying go look at the evidence yourself, read all the police reports yourself, read the journals, and that's what I've been doing, to be fair. And I'm still in the middle. I mean, one day I'm bouncing one way, next day I'm bouncing the next, and it's basically document to document. Is making me jump back and forth, but there's a lot of questions in this case that I need answered. A lot of things I'm wondering what were done, what wasn't done. So I figured I wanted to reach out to somebody that has been researching this case from the very start. And they are the creator of the Facebook page, the Justice for David Crowley and Family. And I wanted to reach out to them. So I want to welcome my guest. Let's bring him in here. There he is. Welcome, Dan Hennen. Welcome to my crypt. How are you doing today, my friend?
Doing very good. Very good. Well, doing well. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank you for taking the time to come and actually speak with me. As I was saying in my little bit of an intro there, I didn't want to make a big intro because I wanted to get to talking to you. And I want to thank you for taking the time to do this because, as I was saying, I definitely found out after doing a couple interviews that there is definitely two groups, two sides to this camp. And I think a lot of people like me that are in the middle, but there's definitely two camps. There's the camp that says David is guilty. The evidence proves it. And then there's another side that's saying he is not guilty and that there's a lot of evidence that proves that he did not do this. And so, I mean, it's for people that don't know about this case, it's a big case to get into if you want to look into the evidence. So I want to start off by asking you, Dan, how did you find this case and what made you look into it and decide that you think that David Crowley did not do the what they say he did?
Well, it's interesting. It's a good question because there's two reasons that I got into the case. Number one, the story happened 30 minutes from where I live. And so I'm in Minnesota. The case happened in Minnesota. And before moving to where I live now, I lived in Apple Valley, about a half a mile from where the incident took place, raising my daughters there. And so it very much hit home physically. It hit home. I knew exactly where the area was, and this whole thing, exploded. And so that's one reason I followed the case. The other reason, it came pretty much on the heels of the Philip Marshall family murder case in California. I was investigating that case, looking into that. There was a case where Philip Marshall, a retired airline captain, but a 9/11 truther, was coming out with a new book. It was only in transcript form. It didn't get published, and he was found murdered along with his two children and family dog. Everyone had a single gunshot wound to the head. The police blamed it on a double murder suicide, and then he killed himself because of the debt he was in and problems he was facing. We started a justice page for that to start doing some interviews on that case and quickly found out that that was a professional hit, professional hit that killed Philip, his teenage daughter, and his teenage son, and the family dog, all killed. It was quickly wrapped up, quickly rushed to judgment, and nothing really mentioned since. And I was able to conduct interviews with his sister and members of the family and members of the community to show that, that he did not do that. He was not in debt. He was making a good monthly payment, a good monthly income coming in on his retirement and whatnot. So the stories that all led to that was we're able to see propaganda feed into the story and propaganda feeding into the news. The morning that I was introduced to this case, a friend emailed me the link and said, looks like the same thing happened in Minnesota, except they didn't kill the dog.
Okay.
I get
The
this link.
similarities are crazy. I have to admit,
It
that's
was
crazy.
exactly the same. And I said, oh, this looks like a professional hit. I'll look into the family. I didn't know David Crowley. I didn't know his wife. I didn't know the daughter. I didn't know what his project, the Gray State, even was. And I'm a truther. I'm out there following true conspiracies, essentially, not the false ones, but the true ones. David Crowley, living right in Minnesota. I didn't know the man. I didn't know his name. Wasn't familiar with the project at all. But I looked into it, thinking it was a government hit, a government assassination, and whatnot. Quickly, the first thing I found by looking into it, that it was a happy family, the family that got together. They were successful. They were doing things. Things were happening on a positive note. And folks jump forward right away and say that he's not a suicidal guy. He's not crazy. And so I jumped on that right away and thought, this is another one of these deals. And the first story I heard on the news said it was a double murder followed by a suicide. And it seemed to me there was a rush to judgment. It was quickly closed and the police were off. Crime scene tape removed. Everything was back to normal. Done deal. So that was raised the antenna for me that something was up. So I created the Justice for David Crowley and Family Facebook page just to research it and gather the information as it started coming out. All the news reports, once again, were very similar. They all had the same narrative. There wasn't any reports that said, maybe they were murdered. Maybe all three were murdered. All of them were kind of flowing the same narrative. So to me, that landed into that propaganda zone, that something didn't seem right. Something seemed fishy. Something seemed off. And I created the page and we started getting members and folks following. We didn't have an answer as to what happened. We just figured that David more than likely didn't kill himself, and started the page and started getting people that were sympathetic to the case without really coming up with too many theories as to what happened. We just knew something seemed off. And so I created it 2 days after the bodies were discovered on Monday, January 19th is when I created the page.
That's amazing. That I didn't even know about the story that you just talked about, how there was another case and it's basically identical except they didn't murder the dog. And that's a part of the case that I just something in the back of my head that I always thought about is, okay, I know David, from what I can tell, really loved that dog, and he leaves the dog alive. I don't, like, if he did do this, I don't understand why he would take his daughter's life, his wife's life, his life, and then leave the dog there to fend for itself. I just found that just something odd. I thought about one of the many things I find odd in this case, and I want to warn people that if you haven't, and you're just tuning in and you haven't heard about Gray State, and you start looking at the David Crowley case, you're going to go down a lot of rabbit holes and you're going to hear a lot of things. It's not as cut as dry as I think a lot of people on one side think that it is, at least in my opinion. And I'm doing what everybody said, to look at the evidence myself, look at the pictures myself, read everything, and that's what I'm doing. Now, I definitely read his journal. Have you read his journal already?
I've skipped through it fairly quickly.
Right, but from what I can tell in his journal, yes, he was having some issues, and I think he, in his own way, he was. No, I don't think he was ever diagnosed with PTSD. I do think he was treating it, some form of it, but trying to treat it himself. From what I can tell in the journal, this is just my opinion from what I read. Anybody can interpret it their own way. But I don't think, like, a lot of people are saying he snapped and that he was in a dark place and all of that. And I don't see it in the journals as much as other people do. I see a man struggling with certain issues and doing that. But what did you find in your research that he was going off the rails, or he was depressed or so bad that he would, or anything that would lead to what happened that day? Like, do you think that he was just a normal guy, like I think, and just going through normal day stuff?
Well, here's what I would answer to that is, as a young father and husband, him and his wife were going through some struggles. They were new parents. They had a young 5-year-old daughter. They were going through some struggling. I don't think there was any depression there. I don't think anyone was mentally ill. David did serve his country in the war, so he was over there in Afghanistan, came back. He did see some things that were awful, and he may very well have had PTSD, suffered from some sort of things. He did he did see things over there in the Middle East that made him disillusioned with what was really going on in the world. So no doubt things like that did exist. Did they drink? I think a little bit, not a lot. Did they do drugs? Yes. They did drugs, not a lot, but they did them. And I think a lot of people following the case, they start seeing these, the low-hanging fruit.
Right, I
So
agree.
say the PTSD, marijuana, drugs, mushrooms, whatever, things like that they were doing, conspiracy kind of a guy. And they quickly jump to the conclusion that it's more than likely he did this. He was a loose cannon and had issues and all that came to a head. Those things are certainly topics to discuss. Certainly topics to discuss. They were happy and a successful family, but that's not to say that they had their struggles.
Right, I agree. Like everyone else. Well, I mean, it's just especially. I totally agree. It's a young family. They're finding their way, and what I find very that supports that is after the police went through all of the terabytes of data, like information they had on his hard drives and stuff like that. Even the police themselves couldn't find any motive for David doing this, and that I think that speaks volumes. Like out of all of the information they looked at for a year, they couldn't find any motive for David. I think that really speaks volumes that this wasn't something that was like gradually happening or anything like that. Like it just really, to me, it just speaks volumes.
I think that's true. A lot of people who follow the case, David was a screenwriter, and I would call him a gifted screenwriter with a very high IQ, very intelligent, and a lot of things growing up in life I think bored him, and he wasn't really challenged a lot, and so his IQ was up there, very bright guy, and then he finally got something that he liked to be able to get his arms around, this project called The Gray State, and went with it. Mm-hmm. But also as a screenwriter and a very artistic guy, he documented everything. He wrote a lot of things down. He opened up, talked about things that were difficult to talk about, and many things most people wouldn't talk about. He videoed a lot of things. He audio recorded a lot of things. He jotted a lot of things down. He always had a big, he was documenting basically his life. So yes, when the case did come up and the Apple Valley Police Department had the gargantuan task of going through all these terabytes of data, there was lots to go through. Now, the first thing you'd go through with a case like this, and the first thing that I wanted to look at is with such an extreme event, such as a suicide homicide, a double homicide followed by a suicide, that's a pretty tall order. That's a lot going on there. And with someone who writes so much and documents so much, my first thing I was interested in was the suicide note. And so what was that? What was that like? What did it look like? How did he pour out and open up his heart to describe to his family left behind what he was dealing with? And so the first thing that I thought of, and those of us following the case, is we need to see the suicide note. There's got to be a note. There's got to be something. Mm-hmm. And we warned others just to have a heads up that make sure we get something handwritten. Suicide note, typically dated, signed, and handwritten. Once you start seeing it done digitally or a note typed, that leaves open the possibility of someone else doing it, forging it, planting the scene, staging the scene. Mm-hmm. And so our first thing was to wait for more reports to come out to see what happened, but mainly get that suicide note to see what the thinking was in his mind and what was going on. And lo and behold, you get the suicide note typed, one single sentence typed on his laptop in WordPad, I think, or a text document, Microsoft Word file. And that was really it. And anyone could have typed that. So the antenna was really raised at that point that something seemed off for a guy that documented his whole life. How he couldn't take the time to write out a meaningful suicide note or what the reason was for all this. And so there really wasn't any. It almost seemed staged. And some of the things that we were expecting to see on some of these other cases that I've followed all seem to now all of a sudden fall into place of blueprints of things that happen in a staged or a professional hit an assassination, a murder, not stuff that comes up in a murder-suicide. So it seemed off from the get-go.
Right, and yeah, and I totally agree that there's a lot, and so much with this case when you start diving into it, to things that don't make sense, and that's why I keep jumping back and forth, because sometimes I'll find an answer or a question, and I've even went to the point where I've talked to a vet because I wanted to find out about Paleo the dog and if he could do what this dog did and what the vet thought. So I am going to be doing a video. I keep saying I will, but I will shortly, about what the vet told me, which some of it surprised me, some of it didn't. Now, what was some of the evidence when you first started looking into it where the red flags really started going up? Like when you started diving into this case, no suicide note for one, which is, I agree with you, which is seems for David's flair for writing and documenting everything, not to have some type of note to his family or something. I found strange too, and I have thought of that. So that makes sense that you thought of it. What are some of the other evidence that really started getting your antennas going up when you started diving in?
Well, for me, it was waiting for the police reports and waiting for more information from the police. And that wasn't really forthcoming. There wasn't anything those first couple of days. There were small blurbs. There's only one, to this day, there's only one mention in a news report ever that it was a potential triple homicide.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
And so that was odd, because everything has since gone to double murder followed by a suicide of a crazed individual, done deal. And so in Apple Valley, the police did come forward with a public statement that they did put some time into, saying the police and the community should not be in fear. There's no murderers or killers running around. David did this. The community is not in danger. So they went out of their way to make that statement to push the stress off of the killers on the loose. Mm-hmm. I thought that was odd, because we still didn't know the answers of what was going on, but they were very quick to get that out there. Now, while I was waiting for reports and we're gaining members of the group that were friends and family and friends of the Crowley family, we saw another thing take place. We saw the social media was the big indicator for me. David was working in a group with the project with 5 or 6 close friends and individuals. And if you went to their personal Facebook pages, they all kind of mentioned that they were grieving the loss of their close friend.
Right.
They need time to grieve the loss of their close friend. But right the same day I set up that Facebook group page, I started getting requests to shut it down and to take it down, or to hand over rights to someone who knows the case. And I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting, actually.
In my mind, I thought if you're so busy grieving, how do you have time to worry about what someone else? They didn't know who I was at the time. I didn't know who they were. Why would they be interested or concerned with a no name creating a justice page just looking for what happened in this case? That would certainly be the last thing they'd be spending their time with. Mm-hmm. And then we got inundated with everyone from the Gray State group, David's alleged friends, trying to wrestle administrative rights for me to say, you know what, hand off. You created the page. You now have the rights to give administrative rights to be a moderator for your page. They weren't interested in just posting, which anyone could do. It's an open group. But they're interested in the administrative rights to be able to lock, block, delete content.
Wow. I didn't know that, Dan. That's crazy.
They were right. That was the very first day that I had this thing set up. So I had maybe 200-300 members at the time, and people were they wanted the rights. They wanted to take the page down or shut it down because I didn't know the story. Therefore, I should not be presenting ideas to the public. Mm-hmm. And that I took very odd. So I didn't give administrative rights to anybody. And then I started seeing the target go on my back by not playing nice with the individuals that they now deemed me an enemy combatant, a bad guy. Mm-hmm. And I just thought there was nothing here. I'm posting links to various articles that came out about the case, posting links to different things, and just kind of having a one-stop shop for all things related to this case, because there really wasn't much in the media about it, but there was a lot of little things going on. We're also following at this time David's personal Facebook page. Mm-hmm. Now he's allegedly dead, going back months and months and finding out, how happy he was in the marriage, how happy that his career was going, a new project that he wound up, landing a big contract for a Hollywood movie. And so more people wanted to get links to that. They said, that really interests me. I want to see that. And so the next day I go to that page, and those comments are all deleted, scrubbed off David Crowley's personal Facebook page.
Wow.
Not all the comments, certain comments. Not all the pictures, certain pictures. Not all the remarks that he made on other articles, but certain. So something was being censored on David Crowley's personal Facebook page.
Which is
Now, David Crowley's
very
dead.
strange. Yeah, that's
If
very
David Crowley's
strange.
dead, who's making posts on his Facebook page? If people are busy grieving, too busy to be doing other things, is someone on his page monitoring, deleting, editing, censoring things? And if so, why? If he did it, there'd be nothing to cover up, nothing to hide. And so we saw a bunch of these things removed. Now, being that I was following this other case in California, I knew right away to start screenshotting things just to have as evidence. And luckily enough, I screenshotted these things of David on his own personal page saying, I'm happy. We got a new contract. We got a deal to make a Hollywood movie about my project. This is my dream come true. I have the screenshot with the timestamp on it. Now you go to it and it's gone. Why would someone feel the need to do that? The better question yet is, who had access to David Crowley's personal Facebook page?
Right.
Now, they also had a Facebook page for the group and for the project. And some things were edited and changed there. That didn't raise too much of a fuss with me because multiple people had rights to make changes or to edit those group pages. I didn't worry about that. But it really concerned me that David Crowley's personal Facebook page was edited after his death. And so there was, at that time, a number of people coming forward saying, I think this was a faked death. David's really alive.
I've heard that too.
And are these just fake bodies? Are they mannequins? The first thing that the neighbor saw when they saw the bodies, he used the phrase mannequins. Now, a lot of people, when they see bodies for the first time that have been sitting there for a while, do describe them as mannequins. So that doesn't really raise too much of a alarm bell. But the fact that they said they saw mannequins, the folks thought, are the Apple Valley police in on a cover-up, on a conspiracy, because there were no real bodies, and the Crowley family is living on an island somewhere in the Pacific, enjoying life. So once again, we kept those plausible theories out there because they may have been true. I was more concerned on why is someone editing David's Facebook page. So as the creator of the Justice page, we wanted to really look out for the victim here. We wanted to make sure someone's looking out for the victim and victims. So when I created the page, it was for the family. And that was sometimes taken the wrong way as well. The reason I created the Justice for David Crowley and family was to have a spot that we could honor David, Kamel, and Rani, or Rania, the daughter. This had nothing to do with David's family, meaning his extended family, his blood relatives, things like that. And people thought that we're doing it kind of for them, but it was mainly just for those three individuals, David's immediate family. But there was a lot of theories coming up too, and people thought it was a professional hit, and that was still in the mix as well. With professional hits and things like that done undercover, you do see articles swept away, deleted from the web, articles removed, history and contents of persons' lives wiped away, swept away. And so there's something bigger going on there when you see things like that. Here, there was nothing cleaned up as far as articles and things being swept away, but there was just edits being done. So the question was, who was on David Crowley's Facebook page? Who had his login credentials? Who had his password and username? Someone's making changes, and we didn't think it was the Great State Project guys, because they had all gone on record to say that they were spending all this time grieving, and they don't have time to do things. But that raised a question, because I had now a target on my back. They're coming after me to shut the page down, or at least to grant them administrative rights so they can get the true story out there. And I said, well, we don't know what the true story is.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're still interested in getting the story out there, what if it's a narrative that you want to get out and it's true, then it makes me look bad. So I said, I'll run the show. I'll run the site. I can use some gladly use some assistance and some help, but I don't want other people having administrative rights to my page.
Right. And that's totally understandable. I wouldn't want people having rights to my page either. So, and it's very suspicious that because somebody obviously did have his credentials to go in and delete stuff like that. I did hear about that, and I've also heard exactly what you said. I've heard that some people think that he's still alive. Him and his family are still alive, and there's some people I've talked to that still believe that this was all something set up. And I have trouble with that theory in a lot of ways. I mean, I do understand what David was investigating is a very touchy subject, and he was doing the Gray State movie and the trailer and stuff like that. But to be fair, there's a lot of people that do content about the subjects he was covering. They don't end up dead. So that's why I have trouble with that one. I do understand that government hits happen. I fully believe that, and I know they happen, but I just don't understand. And I'm kind of like, maybe that's where you were too, is I just don't see why they would do it to David. I mean, he wasn't doing anything that I can bring up YouTube videos where they talk about FEMA camps and they talk about everything he was covering, not maybe all in one movie or subject, but they're definitely covering it. So I have trouble believing that, you know, unless there's some other thing I don't know about that was going on in his life, and that's why this could have happened. But from what I can research, he was just a movie creator, and I don't think that's a reason to kill him and his whole family and that. So I've had trouble with that one. But I do agree. I've heard that he's away on an island, and then I've also heard that some people think it's a government hit, which I don't see that either. I'm kind of like in your boat, that it's a little bit too messy for me. Like, I mean, they didn't take any of his data. They left everything there. And if they were trying to shut this movie down and that, you would think they would do that or burn the house down or do something, I mean, to get rid of it. So I definitely feel that we're on the same page with a lot of this so far. Now, what evidence is, like some of the evidence that really makes me wonder is the door. Everybody's saying it couldn't be murder because there was no break and enter. And I'm like, okay, that's a it's a straw man argument because the back door was open a little bit. So, I mean, you don't need a break and enter for a murder to happen. It could have been somebody that he let in, or they could have come through the door. What is your thoughts on some of the evidence that they're trying to link towards him doing it? I see a lot of holes in a lot of it, to be honest.
And the first thing, and one of the things was the articles that came out from the Napa Valley Police Department all mentioned murder, suicide. A guy went off the deep end and murdered his family.
Right, and quickly they came to this conclusion within a couple hours.
They quickly came to the conclusion, but nothing in the police report mentioned anything about the rear slider door being left open. Mm-hmm. So someone on our group went and downloaded the audio tape of the police recording that very same day when they responded. And the first officer around the back, you can see, says, you can hear it goes, rear slider door open, unlocked, slightly ajar. Mm-hmm. And so that was an authentic tape, not audio, not filtered or faked or anything. So we know the back door was open, but we weren't wondering why the police were commenting that on their press releases, that the rear slider was open. Remember, this is January 2015 in Minnesota. Your rear sliders are never open in the state of Minnesota in January. Right, it's way too cold outside.
Yep.
Way too cold. And so once we found out that the rear slider was open, then there was more allegations and things of why was the dog left behind? Couldn't the dog get out if the door was open? And so we didn't get the actual answer from the police as far as how far it was left open. It was open like a quarter of an inch. Folks thought the dog could have got his snout in there, opened it up, and ran off if he was hungry. But the police first came out and said that there was no breaking and entering, which was true. There wasn't. Mm-hmm. But they really pushed the fact that there was no breaking and entering. Well, what I thought right off the bat is if someone got in, you've got the rear slider open, whether it was a hit or not, or someone came in that they knew. And so right away, it was flimsy to begin with. Right. It was a flimsy deal. And so the murder that took place that I think is as a triple homicide was by someone that the family knew. Someone that they knew. The perpetrators were someone that they knew. They let them in or something happened to allow them to come in. I don't know if the back rear slider had anything to do with the killings, the murders at all. The rear slider comes into play if there was potentially perpetrators coming back and forth in those 3 weeks that were unaccounted for? Was there multiple visits to the scene? Now, a professional hit, there would not be multiple visits. A professional hit would be clean. This, when we started to get the information that came out, wasn't clean. A professional hit, like the Marshall case, everyone had a single gunshot to the head, very clean, gone, perpetrator's gone, done deal. Here, there was all this other noise going on in the background. And then we get the information that Comel was shot 3 times. Rania was shot 1 time. David was shot 1 time. The dog wasn't shot at all. And so we get this varying set of circumstances that led me to believe far less that there was a government hit at all or a professional hit at all. And to this day, I don't believe that is the case, but I left that open.
Right, you got to leave it open, right? Because you never know with new evidence it could come to that. But I am in the same boat as you. I don't think it's very stagey and messy to me. I've always said that. Like, it's just I think professionals go in, they get the job done, and they leave, and that's it. And they're not concerned about all this staging. Now, I'm not sure. I haven't looked at a ton of cases that are professional hits, but I don't think they would spend the time. And for me, that's what's always bothered me about this case. Is it seems very staged. It really does. Like, they really went overboard. And I mean, I've had people say to me that David, because he was into writing scripts and all that, he would want to be this theatric when he did this. And I have trouble with that. What do you think?
Well, like I said with the suicide note, someone that's very artistic and creative like David and likes to jot things down, there would be I would suspect a 2-page letter written behind on all the reasons and the pros and cons of why he was doing this.
Exactly.
If he did it. And there wasn't anything left. But we have a door left open in January. We got the dog still alive. And the police now come out and say that it's a .40 caliber handgun with no silencer. They're saying it's a Springfield automatic handgun, no silencer. Right. Now, I lived in that neighborhood. I drove by through that area. Those houses are fairly close together. It's in January. It's calm outside. Number one, my biggest thing was, how many neighbors heard these gunshots? Right. The answer was none. And so not just that too. And not just one shot each, 3 gunshots, they're still going to hear that. That's going to sound like a cannon going off in the backyard in a small residential neighborhood like that. And then they said there were 6 shots fired, and Comel was shot 2 to 3 times. So once again, professional hit, that doesn't sound like the case. It would be a silencer or something involved. This would have been really loud. The dog stayed alive, but the only time the neighbors heard the dog barking was the day the bodies were discovered. I thought, I've grown up with dogs. That dog would be barking a long time, I think, many days. Right. Up at the window, trying to get attention, trying to get out, make awareness. And so they allegedly said that the bodies were there up to 3 weeks. That's 21 days of the dog being alone with 3 dead bodies. I think that the barking would have been obnoxious for the neighbors. And we don't get that. We don't get any testimony from the neighbors saying the dog was annoying. We do hear from the police that it's 6 gunshots. It was a .40 caliber handgun. The rear sliders open, the front door is locked. None of this even makes sense. So what we got at that point was a lot of theories coming into play on our justice page that the bodies were dealt with at a secondary crime scene and then dumped here. They were killed elsewhere and dumped here. The other thing we first saw with the results that came in from the police is that there's very little blood at the scene.
Right, I noticed that too.
And shots to the head, there'd be blood everywhere. There'd be blood spatter everywhere. There'd be blood spatter on the walls, blood spatter on the ceilings, blood spatter on the floor, and pooling of blood as well. We didn't see any of that. And so there was very little blood. So many people thought whether it was a hit or a triple homicide, there was a secondary crime scene. That could still be the case, who knows? But if they were killed there, in my mind, there had to have been a silencer used. Those houses are too close together for a .40 caliber handgun for no one to hear in the dead of winter. 6 gunshots. I agree.
That's what when I was doing my research, even now, I keep going back to that. How did nobody hear 6 guns going? It would have sounded, I agree with you. It sounds like a cannon. It would sound like a cannon. I've heard those guns go off. They're very loud. And you have 6 of them. and nobody notices the flashings of if it happened at night, flash going off or anything. And I also agree with the dog, and I did bring that up with my vet, and he thought that was very strange that nobody heard the dog. I know my neighbors have dogs, and if they're gone to work too long, you'll hear the dogs in the evening start barking and causing a little bit of a fuss. So to think Paleo was there for 3 weeks and then he didn't make any noise till the day that they discovered the bodies, I find that's a big stretch for me, just to be fair.
And so what the other thing with the dog Paleo was a medium-sized beagle mix, maybe 25 pounds. And when police did the report, they came back and found that Comel, the wife, didn't have any hands. Her hands were gone, her hands were missing. Yep. David's right hand was missing, and Ranya's entire right arm was gone. And so what they said and what they did was this. They said, it's been 3 weeks. They kept trying to push this 3 weeks thing, and I don't know how accurate that even is. But they said for 3 weeks, once the dog's food is gone, the dog needs something to eat. So the dog went to the hands, the dog went to the arm, and the dog went to various parts of the face. There wasn't much of the head left to eat. Well, right away, we started getting folks with dogs and people with veterinary backgrounds and things like that jumping on our page to say, well, a dog, if it needs something to eat, is going to go to a fleshy part of the body, the side, the stomach, the back, the thigh, somewhere to get food to eat. Right, would not go for hands, would not go for an arm. Now, one thing that we didn't get from the police is the answer, which you still don't have, if the dog allegedly did this, where are the bones? The dog would have eaten the meat or the skin or the flesh, the muscles, the ligaments, those types of things if the dog was that hungry. And maybe even some of the smaller bones in the fingers. But when I met with Detective Gummert at the Apple Valley Police Department back in May of 2017, I believe it was, I asked him directly, I said, where's Ranya's arm? We have a radius and an ulna, big arm, 5-year-old girl, not a big bone,
right?
But big enough that it's going to be laying somewhere in the home. I asked Detective Gummert, I said, where's the arm? He said, I think the dog ate it. I said, where's the upper section? Where's the forearm? The dog ate it. Where's the fingers? Where's all the bones in the hand? The dog must have eaten it all. Because the police report clearly states that no other body parts were found in the home. There was some, next to the crime scene, some small pieces of skull and some small fragments of someone's skull. But nowhere does it say that there was fingers and arms laying around the house.
Right.
Now, that posed two questions. Because number one, I thought by hearing Detective Gummert give his answer that he never really thought through the logistics of a dog eating a full-size forearm of a 5-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. I don't think it crossed his mind. He just assumed the dog ate it and devoured the whole thing. So there would be feces that need to be tested all throughout the house, and that was never done. If the dog did grind up and eat small bone fragments of fingers and things like that, realistically, could the dog have eaten those and digested those? Yes, but they'd still have to come out. Where's all the teeth? Where's David and Comel's teeth? There was no mouth left. Where are the individual teeth of David and Comel? Wouldn't it come out in the dog's feces or something? They're not found in the house. Now we get a neighbor of one of the individuals that was on the Gray State Project that showed photos on a phone. Said, check this out. I was a friend of David's. You got to see these photos. Here's one right here, he said, of a human hand laying in the basement. She said, wow, that's nasty. How about this? There's fingers and arms. They're all in the basement. We say, time out. Where did you see these photos? It was on his phone.
Wow.
Well, how would he have photos of his phone? We have every single photo for the police report that they sent. There's no photos of that. Well, we had people jump on and correct us. Remember, we only got the censored version of the photos that came out from the police department. They would not give us, the general public, the bloody, meaty, gruesome photos. Right? Now, how would this person have a photo of a hand? Would they have gotten it directly from the police? If so, that's an ongoing case. The police wouldn't be forwarding photos of anything. Now, so we went back and looked at the police reports all together and read them top to bottom. Nowhere does it mention body parts, much less in the basement, much less a human hand. So the question now is, are there photos floating around out there that people have of a human hand in the basement of the Crowley house that wasn't eaten by the dog? How would that photo exist? Well, the only way the photo would exist is if someone, the perpetrator, took the photo from their phone while on the scene. Mm-hmm. If it indeed did even take place. Now, I still am one to believe that the murderers typically in a case like this would want to take a trophy, take something home, take something as a trophy from this case. I think that Rania's arm is somewhere to this day. Really? There's no way the dog ate it. We know that. It wasn't left at the scene. Someone's got the arm. Someone's got possibly the hands. Someone's got possibly the teeth. All those things never showed up at the scene. So we start leading us forward down this path of a triple murder, nasty murder, suicide slang, but where the dogs, was the dog alone with the bodies for 3 weeks anyway? 3 weeks, the dog would have gotten hungry. Yes. So my goal then was, we had all the photos from the crime scene. Granted, the gruesome photos were excluded, but I said, let's go to every room in that house and look for the water bowls. Where's the dog's water dish? Mm-hmm. Where's the dog's food dishes? There may have been, in my home, there's a dog dish upstairs, there's a dog dish downstairs, there's a water dish upstairs, a water dish downstairs. There's going to be multiple water dishes. We had our team of volunteers on the justice page not find a single water dish in that house. No dog dish. Dog drinks
that's strange.
Water out of a dish, right? So did the perpetrator take the water dish? Where's the dog bowls, the food bowls? None. Now there's dog food there. One of the photos does show a 40-pound bag of Purina dog food, whatever it was. Yep. Still there. Well, if a dog was 3 weeks without food, probably would have torn into, ripped that bag open, ripped it all apart, and would have eaten. But the police kept saying, and the Gray State people in the membership of the group, David's alleged buddies, kept saying the dog was so hungry he had to start eating the bodies of the flesh of the people there.
Right.
Okay, right. I can agree with that. I don't buy it, but I can agree with it. It makes sense at least. But the real question is, where's the dog's water bowl? Where's the dog's water dish? Where's the dog's food bowl? They were gone. They were taken. So obviously things were taken from the house that weren't, police never looked and said, hey, you know what? I guess you're right. We looked at all the photos. Where's the water dish? Where's the food dish? They're gone. But then we also heard stories of things that allegedly were there that were never there. We heard stories of the Gray State buddies and friends saying, you know, we had to get inside that house and start removing some of the things. So criminals wouldn't get in that house, you know, removing the TVs, the flat screens, and all those kinds of things. They were valuable. Someone could have broke in and took them. We went back and busted them again by saying, here's the crime scene photos taken the day the bodies were discovered. There's not a TV in that house. These two didn't watch television. There was not a TV in the house. There was no big screen. There was no flat screen. So now our focus shifts over to the Gray State guys that are left living and saying, why are you inserting information into the story that's wrong? And so we started to take a look at that side. Were you guys involved with editing David Crowley's Facebook page? You know, what's all behind this? Why are you looking at me to take my page down? Why do you want administrative rights on my page, on my Facebook page? There was no TVs in the house. Then the question came down to, how good of friends were you? And so we started getting somewhere when we found out that David was not good friends with any of these folks. He was co-workers, co-employees with them, worked with them on the team, worked on the project with them. Some he was better friends with, some he was less friends with, but none were really his close friend. And so they kind of got stumped there by saying that they were how close of a family they were. Well, Comel was David's best friend. Everything he did, everything he thought, everything he did was with Comel, best friends. Mm-hmm. The group of the Gray State guys he was not that close with. He was close, but he kept it at arm's length from a business perspective. Now, these are the guys, all of the men, by the way, these are the guys continually pushing this story, funneling this story of the dog eating everything, the bodies there for 3 weeks, David committing the crimes, and how sad and grieving they were. Well, the next thing comes is this funeral, the funeral for David. I posted, I'm interested in going. I'd like to see how things turn out. I'd like to see the reaction. I'd like to see if the casket's open, closed, what the family does, the interactions of everybody. And then I get a threat to say, you better not show up at that memorial service at all.
Wow.
So I'm like, well, I don't even know the guy. What do you care if I show up to a memorial or not? Well, they didn't let me go. I wasn't interested in going anywhere. I didn't go. But we get back a comment from one of the David Crowley's cousins who says, Dan, I want to add something to the justice page. I never saw a more group of happy, flippant, happy-go-lucky guys at a memorial than I did at David's funeral. She said no one was grieving. They were cracking jokes. They had looked to me, they said, the cousin said, like a 100-pound weight had been lifted from their back. They looked relieved that he was dead. And I said, that's more of a direction I want to go in and pursue. That's no way to be saying you're grieving and then you're spending time on my Facebook page. The very day that my Facebook page was created, you're trying to take it down. And David's stuff is deleted off his Facebook page. I don't think anyone's grieving in this case. So she confirmed it, and the cousin said that, no, there was jokes, there was smiles on the faces.
Wow.
So we had to go back into the whole motive thing. And so what would be the motive for the Gray State guys to kill their own best friend, their buddy? And so it comes back all to this motion picture, this deal that David got. He signed a deal with some Hollywood producers for a $30 million budget film to make it. Now, that had not gone forward yet.
Right.
All David had was this script that he pitched, and they ended up biting on it. $30 million. So one could actually argue that the script itself on paper was really valued at $30 million. With David out of the way, could the remaining guys benefit from moving forward with the script? That's the only thing I could think of as a motive. But we had to entertain that. We had to look into that. And what we found when we discovered the legal aspect of it and the correspondence going back from David's attorney back and forth is David wanted to get rid of two of his business buddies, one with the business that he sold and resold, refurbished, and used police equipment.
Right.
Bullet Exchange. He had a buddy named Mitch Heil that he ran a company called Bullet Exchange. A lot of people use it for props and things like that. He asked him to release his rights to move forward to moving with the Gray State. He wants to not work with these other folks. He asked him to sign away his rights. He sold the business, had a garage sale. That was done. The other guy he owned a business with was the script that he's writing with Danny August Mason.
Mm-hmm.
Danny August Mason was one in August of 2014, also received that letter saying, I don't want anything to do with you for this film. I'm going to move forward myself. You may have a role as an actor in this movie, but I'm moving forward without you as a business partner.
Right.
Danny August Mason refused to sign that, and it took several months until the bodies were found. He never did sign that. That was the wedge that was being drawn. David and Danny August Mason were very close in creating this script, very close in opening up the minds of people, red-pilling them to the conspiracies, the true ones that were going on, and they wanted to make this movie together. David wanted to move ahead without him and said, I want to produce this thing. It was later found out that David wouldn't have been the producer or the director at all. They would have gotten someone else in there. But he needed to release his rights from being a co-business decision with Danny August Mason, and Danny didn't respond back. And when he did bug him a couple months later, he said that I'm going to have my attorney look at it, and I'll get back to you later. It never ended up getting done. So the friction was there. Danny says, look, here's my buddy that I kind of took under my wing to teach him the ways, red pill him to waking up to the real deal, and now he wants to leave me behind and disband me on a $30 million deal. I think that's where the anger and whatnot came in. So he wasn't going to sign that. And so that all erupted. It was 7 years ago this month. 7 years ago. He was going to get him away from the business dealings in August, September, and October. And finally, November came, 2014, 7 years ago. He says, Danny, you need to, we got the emails. You need to sign that legal document so we can move forward. My production with the movie, the Gray State movie, the $30 million production is on, it's tabled. It's tabled. We can't, they pressed pause. We can't do anything until this document is signed and returned so I can move forward without you. He refused to sign it. And so in the third week of November, right about where we are now, in the middle of November 7 years ago, as things really came to a head, is when David Crowley gave him an ultimatum. It says, look, I'm giving you a deadline. December 16th, I'm moving ahead without you, whether you sign it or not. I'm going to make this movie. December 16th. And so we find out in the emails later that came to light with the FOIA requests that Danny August Mason did write back on December 16th and says, yo, bro, give me a call. We need to talk this out. Let's get this thing resolved. David says, nope, I'm not interested. You had the deadline. You had all these months to figure it out, and you didn't want to do it. That's why it's interesting that in less than a week later, the bodies are all found. It had something to do with that script, a motive to get that script in their hands. Remember, valued at $30 million. Now, the other thing with a professional hit, I'm going to jump back a step. You're going to get the person taken out, David Crowley taken out. You don't need, if David's waking up too much of the public, waking up and red pilling the population, there's no need for Kamel to die. There's no need for Rania to die. But what's the only reason you need to have all three killed is who's the heir to that script. If David owns a script and it's in his name and he owns it 100%, if you kill him, it's not going to do you guys any good. It's going to land in Kamel's lap. If Kamel's killed, it's going to land in Rania's lap. The only way they're going to get that script which they wanted and they ultimately took is if they kill all three. So they kill all three, it lands into the Crowley family estate, basically. The father, who's not a good guy in my mind. David Crowley's brother, who's not a good guy in my mind. David Crowley's sister, who doesn't have an impact in this case at all, I don't think. So you got to look at, was there anyone communicating with David's father or his brother to help get that script? And the answer is yes. They were all buddies with Dan Sr., Dan Jr., the brother, and connected with the father. And so it was right away after the bodies were found, the murders were done. 3 months later, Danny August Mason, if you look hard enough and deep enough into not the crime itself, but into the motive. And what we found was that Danny August Mason had an attorney and filed for trademark and copyrights to the name The Gray State Universe. Created a company called Gray State Universe LLC. Created a Facebook group. Remember, he had to change the name. It wasn't Gray State. He had to put Universe on the end and make it an LLC. But he was getting the copyrights done with an attorney to start having all this so they could start going out and releasing this movie and revising the script and pitching it to new people. In my mind, if they knew it was worth $30 million and that they now had it and David was out of the way, they could pitch it to any number of Hollywood executives and maybe even get $15 million deal out. David was a perfectionist. He wanted to keep the content the way it was. He pitched it to many producers and they said, we like the concept, but we're going to change how this ends and change how this begins and change the characters and change some of the thought processes. And David says, no, not interested. I'm going to keep it the way it is because this is the way it's going to work. And everyone said no. And he said, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine. He finally found a group that wanted to keep it as is, albeit bring in their own director and to produce it. Producer and director. David said, that's fine. I don't have to. I can step back. You guys take it and run, but I want to keep it in its form, the way it is now.
Right.
I think the Gray State guys on the project, there's 4 or 5 or 6 of them that weren't really, number one, friends with David, were not close friends with David, did not have David's interest at heart. And I think they wanted that to land in their lap for the hard work that they did to take it over and to somehow get that script in their hands and move forward and then make a movie. Now, I don't think these guys would have worried too much if the Hollywood producers would have said, we're going to scrap this and alter this and change this. They would have said, fine, we're going to cash in. Keep in mind, the guys on the Gray State Project team, one was unemployed, two of them didn't have a job. One was working as a part-time model actor. One was a photographer. None of these guys had a source of income. None. Any substantial income. So they were riding David's coattails. They knew he was the next big director. Hollywood was looking at him. A lot of movie productions were looking at him to possibly hire him. I had mentioned in my interview with one of the newspapers that came out that I kind of viewed him as maybe like a next Steven Spielberg kind of a guy, a next big name. So I think they purposely didn't have jobs. They held back and said, let's ride this thing out with David Crowley. Let's use him. Let's ride his coattails. And when he becomes famous, we all subsequently will make money. And then we can go do whatever we want to do. But we have to get this movie out there. And I think that's why the movie never made it, because they needed to kill him off, have the script land in their lap. And it did. It went to Dan Crowley Sr., the dad, and the son. And right away, they started working with communication with Danny August Mason to put this into motion, to make it. And so this is evidence also of the motive and how it was worth it to kill, because it also explains why all three needed to die. If the government hit was done on David Crowley, they would have done it on David Crowley. It would have been a clean hit, assassination, hands wash, done deal. So what we get later is a year after the bodies were discovered, the Apple Valley police come out and say, you know what, we found out more about the case. There was a Muslim angle to the case. There was blood writing on the wall. And there was a note that says, open the Quran. And there's a Quran laying on the floor. There's a message about the Quran. And on the wall, there is, God is great. God is the greatest. Allah Akbar. Written on the wall in blood. So once again, a professional hit would not have gone to these extremes. Now it almost comes off as amateurish, so to say, because it's trying to push too many angles now. And so that's when we kind of led ourselves down the path of it looks like it's an amateur triple homicide done by more than one person. But the true, correct definition of the word conspiracy, two or more people coming together to plan a crime. That's a conspiracy. So in my mind, this probably triple homicide in Apple Valley, Minnesota was a conspiracy. It wasn't carried out by one person. It was carried out by more than one person, people. And it wasn't a government hit. And it certainly wasn't a double murder suicide. So now we got things are more coming into focus, right? After this takes place, we start monitoring, the volunteers on our page started monitoring the good, close friends of David Crowley. And one by one, they all started moving out of state. They all moved out of state. They all left. I think that the heat was getting too strong and had to leave. I think there's only one or two of them even left in the state.
Yeah, that's really weird.
They all left. And so what we think happened is there was a divide or a split with the group, and that broke them into half. And then half the group said, screw it. The other half says, we're going to make this and go and make the movie. Well, one of the volunteers on our page says the rights to that script go all the way through the year 2019, that no one can take the use of that script because he had it registered with the Screen Actors Guild. That script was registered. And now we already have the trademark by Danny August Mason, the legal team, and the business is being created in the state of Minnesota to create Gray State Universe LLC using that script. Now, we also know at the same time, those guys, or the bad guys, are monitoring our page for information. They're monitoring our group, our justice page for information. Well, we've already exposed the fact that they can't do anything with that script until the year 2019, June of 2019. We've got the actual screenshot of the Screen Actors Guild certificate that David owns that. And then we see Gray State Universe go dormant. Nothing happens with it. Danny August Mason then moves himself and leaves and moves to Austin, Texas. I think at that point he knew he could do nothing with the script.
Yeah, well, and it was kind of smart of David to actually have it locked in, right, till 2019. He was definitely thinking ahead.
Well, it was 2015 when the bodies were discovered. So he had that rights to that script for four more years. I'm not sure how all that works and the legality of it, but he was a member of the Screen Actors Guild, had the script registered. So Danny August Mason, if he would have pursued it and made a movie off it, he could have been later potentially sued by the estate or something because of that, the legality of the whole thing. So we see that all diminish and that goes away. Danny August Mason now goes back into his acting career. Sean Wright stays in town. Joseph Seaton moves out. Some other guys move out. It all seems to be, very goofy on how things all come about. And then what we see in the recent year or two here is opposing justice pages popping up on Facebook that are only out to attack our group, not to bring new information, not to bring light to the subject, but more of a propaganda group created to dismiss and discredit us. And so our main 4 volunteers on our page, we all take a big hit from this other group and they're not going after a group as a whole, but individually to discredit us.
Right.
Dan Hennen, he's an idiot. He's a loser. John Doe is an idiot. He's a loser. Jane Doe is an idiot. She's a loser. And so we're like, why would they be going out to try to discredit us? And so that's when this other group started to come in and really try to do what they could to shut us down, because they knew they couldn't shut us down. The only way now is to discredit our group. Now we're up to 3,900 members on our page. And once the movie,
it may be 4,000 now, Dan. I think it broke 4,000.
I think did it just go over to 4,000?
It did.
And I want to say also a big thanks, a shout out to the group running our page. I've taken a step back in monitoring it. We have such a good group of volunteers manning the page, taking on new members, focusing on getting the information out there that our membership is actually increasing. And so every time someone sees that movie on Netflix, it's called The Gray State.
Yeah,
people watch the movie, they see it, and I think 80% of the people watch it and say, okay, no big deal. The guy's a nutcase. David Crowley did it, and they move on. The remaining 20% feel something's not right. Something in their head says, I feel like I just been hoodwinked into something. It didn't seem, it was trying to lead me down a road to believe something rather than just provide evidence. And so that's what that documentary did. And we get a lot of people from our page that join up that have an uneasy feeling after watching that documentary, that they just feel they've been blindsided or hoodwinked or propagandized into believing something that actually did not take place. So we've got a large membership base, but the fighting is still going on with these other groups that are trying to take us
for
down.
Sure, right? Like I was telling you earlier, I did a few interviews already with some of the members of the group, just because I wanted to. And I always say this just to make it clear that I'm willing to hear both sides. I really do want to hear both sides, and I'm willing to talk to either side, because I believe that I want to stay down the middle and actually hear what both sides think and what their evidence is. But to be fair, as soon as I did a video, I never got so many comments in my comment section after I did an interview with Catherine. Like, they lit me up. Like, it was crazy. So I definitely found out that there is, like, as you're saying, they are going after people who are trying to say that David didn't do this. It's not me just saying that. That's just the facts.
So you have to ask yourself, why would there be a group out there that's spending so much of their time doing this? What do they have to gain? It's all volunteer work, or is it? They're not making money on this, or are they?
Mm-hmm.
But the amount of time and energy dedicated to making us look bad is an indicator itself of something that doesn't add up. It's more propaganda they're pushing to try to pull people from the real justice group onto their group, because they think that we are conspiracy theorists, tinfoil wearing hats or what have you. But all our page does is present facts and files and documents of the evidence itself,
Right.
of the evidence. And so there's not much room for, is it right? Is it wrong? I mean, the evidence is there. And so,
But that's what's funny though, Dan, is that's what the other group says though, because they said I should watch their videos on YouTube, and I said I'll take that challenge. I will watch your videos. I mean, I'm trying to find the truth. I'll look at both sides. I believe you have to look at both sides if you want to be fair, and that's what they're using against the people that say that the people that say David is innocent. They're using that, and they're saying the police evidence proves that David did it. And even after I've looked at all the evidence, I don't see all of it that way. There's a lot of holes in what these police did in their investigation. It's shoddy police work at best and a cover-up at worst. I mean, and that's from looking at the files that I found presented. That's from the police, from all the different organizations, and it's not as cut as dry as I think they want people to believe it is. What do you think?
well, the best answer to that is this book written by Greg Fernandez Jr.
Okay.
Greg Fernandez Jr. is a member of our group and a good friend of mine. He wrote a book called The Gray Stage, and it's out there. You can get it. It came out in 2019. It does not bring any theories into play at all. It just goes one by one into the actions that we were told and then the police report response that we were given on every single topic. It goes down. It just lays it all out. And you can tell the conclusion after reading this book is what you just said. At best, it's shoddy police work. At worst, it's a cover-up by the police. Mm-hmm. There's no in between. There's zero way a detective that covers homicides would come to any of these conclusions. And receiving the volumes of information we got from doing the FOIA requests from the city of Apple Valley have all come back. Everything that you could get a FOIA request on, members from our group have sent, and we've received them back. And so we've looked at it and ticked and tied, and things don't add up. Things don't mesh. It looks like a cover-up by police. It looks like a staged event, or it looks like the detectives are imbeciles. That's their only way you can conclude it.
Exactly.
So being right, wrong, or indifferent, it doesn't matter. It doesn't add up. So the question is, we have the evidence from police. It's shoddy at best. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, now this book answers is everything already because it goes through every detail. The opposing groups that are out there trying to make us look bad have decided to come up with a different angle by saying, you know what? You guys haven't received everything.
To be fair, I've heard that.
There's stuff that you guys don't have that we do. Remember the first phrase, the first plan of attack to take us down is the evidence from the police show everybody that reads it that David did it. Well, we got the evidence. It doesn't show, there's no evidence of anything. Mm-hmm. It gives their answers to things and their photos of the crime scene and what happened and some of the research they did, but it doesn't give a reason. The police themselves say there is no motive for David Crowley to do this. There's no motive. This is out of their own mouths.
Exactly.
So our group is in the business of fighting those guys back and forth. And now we see them let that go and say, you know what, the police evidence alone doesn't work. But we see them come up with a new tactic by saying, you guys don't have it all. There's stuff out there that we have that you guys don't have, and we're going to start presenting it. Well, this summer, we start seeing evidence of documents floating around that they start posting and doing videos on their website saying, here's what happens, here's the photo of the living room floor, and the gun's laying right next to David's hand. We're like, well, that doesn't exist. There is no photo of the gun next to David's hand. We have all the photos.
Right.
I said, well, you don't have that one. We have it. He said, well, we've got all the photos that were not gruesome. There's nothing gruesome about a weapon. Why would that one be censored? Well, then we get this information from the other group that says, well, David was using drugs and was not in his right mind, and they were using recreational drugs, and they were taking hallucinogens and all this. And they said, we've got the police document to prove it. So now it's out there. There's a big police document signed by Sheriff Detective Klokanos. Klokanos worked on the electronic crimes unit of this, as far as looking at the computer forensics, the hard drives of all these hard drives,
right.
The Microsoft Surface Pro, the laptop, and all their cell phones. And it shows that he said that they were on drugs, hallucinogens, and whatever. Well, we get our volunteers together and scour all the police reports and say, I don't see this police report ever. I've never seen this ever in my life. Where did it come from? We hear back from the other group. They said, we have it. We have all this information that you don't have. You guys just weren't lucky enough to get the police reports. We get a file. We file this to the Apple Valley Police Department saying, is this something you produced? The actual paperwork from the opposing team's group. Shane Klokanos, the detective, writes an affidavit to get included into the paperwork of this murder case file with the Apple Valley City Attorney that says, I have never seen this, I've never produced this. This is a fake, and someone forged this official-looking document with my name on it. This is not mine. He signs an affidavit, a legitimate affidavit. Remember, the Apple Valley group, the actual police department, doesn't like either of our groups.
Oh, okay.
But they know that we're the truth tellers, and we're being honest and upfront and everything and transparent with everything. The other guys look like morons. Well, this now has tipped the iceberg and moved things in a different direction. Klokanos took it personally that someone was modifying fraudulently an actual police report from a triple homicide and put his name on it. He's got the affidavit in there. There may be a reason to reopen this investigation, this case, because it is a crime to create a forged document from a police detective in a case. It is a crime to do so. So the question is, who forged it and why? And why would they go to such extremes and such lengths to create a forged document, place it on the internet, put it in a public forum, and place it out there? You know, there's one school of thought that's, let's kind of push the envelope a little bit. Let's do some dirty tricks to see what the other group is going to do, if they bite on it or not. But to actually create a forged document and state it's from the Apple Valley Police Department case number XYZ that this case was, from Detective Klokanos, he came back and says, never have I ever seen this document. I didn't create it, and I certainly didn't publish it. And he signed it. It's got a notary stamp right there. So now the question is, what may be perking up the ears to others in this case is the extremes that others will go to bring our group down.
Right.
And would a normal person, would a reasonable person who's got time on their hands create a falsified document just to make another group look bad? More than likely not. Unless they're being paid, unless there's propaganda out there, unless there's agents out there to try to bring us down. I don't know the answer to that, but I know in my mind that a reasonable person would never do such a thing.
Right. And they would need to do such a thing if the police evidence, like they claim, shows that he's guilty beyond a doubt. And that's just look at the evidence. Why would you create it? Why would you need a fake document to try to push your narrative in a certain direction if they say it themselves? Look at the evidence and it's going to prove it to you. Why would you need that document?
So all of this leads into the common sense of we can start throwing out things that are not true. A professional hit. I don't think someone behind a professional hit would go out of the way to make a fraudulent document.
Agreed.
And so if David did this, who would be on the side creating fraudulent documents if David committed the crimes? Nobody. If David committed the crimes, there would be no interest, no motivation to delete posts on his personal Facebook page. So all you can do is really ask yourselves, why would things like these keep coming up? In January is a 7-year anniversary of this event. 7 years this has been going on and on and on, and there's been hundreds of posts and thousands of comments and articles written, documents, videos made. all to show, but law enforcement is not interested in reopening this case. Maybe now, with an affidavit signed by an actual police officer in Apple Valley, it may be enough to wake people up by saying, what would the motivation be to do something criminal? Remember, if they find who created this document, that's a crime this person could be charged with.
Correct.
And it's not a light one either. It's forging a police document of a murder case. It's not a little small misdemeanor.
That sounds
it's
serious
pretty
to me.
serious.
Right.
So the question is, it was forged. We've got proof now that it was forged. Now, anytime we're going back and forth, battling with these other groups, it's time not spent on the case, right?
Right.
So what I tell the folks in our group is don't worry about what they're doing. Their whole intent is to make us sidetracked, send us on a wild goose chase. And so they've been somewhat successful with that, with folks focusing on what they're doing and monitoring their stuff because of this. But it also may be the thing that ends up getting this murder case reopened in Dakota County. The city attorney is involved, is in with this now. Not just the police department, whether the police department's corrupt or not. The city attorney, who's above that,
right,
is now witness to all this shenanigans. So hopefully, in a weird turn of karma, it may end up opening up this case. Many of us, including myself, have thought that this case will never be reopened ever. There's just no way they'll reopen this case. But with the turn of events that are going on, they're throwing Shane Klokonos under the table. And that's a very personal thing. People can point at the Apple Valley Police Department and saying they missed it. They're part of a cover-up. They don't know what they're doing. They're imbeciles. That's easy. Anyone can sit and point fingers all day long. But when you start pointing a finger at an individual person and putting this person's name on a document that's been forged, and now you're taking it to a whole nother level. So that's what we're dealing with kind of here in the now and the current, coming up on the 7-year anniversary.
Wow. Yeah, that document, I do remember seeing that, and I was like, that was the first thing I thought too, is what benefit, why this document? Why would you risk everything to forge this document if all the evidence you need is in the police reports? And I told you, I look into the police reports. I'm reading them. I'm reading the autopsy reports. I read the journal, and a lot of the evidence, I don't understand why they would risk it for this document unless they're trying to distract or they have nothing really to stand on. I don't understand the logic, I guess, because I'm not thinking that way. I don't understand the logic of the document that you're talking about, what it serves to benefit them. It's going to make them look worse in the long run, especially now that it's been proven that it's a forgery. But a lot of the evidence as I'm going through the case, Dan, is what's really troubling. Like I agree. We were speaking about Paleo the dog. I don't understand why they didn't test the dog feces to see if there was bone in there. And I asked the vet if they could do that. He said absolutely, they could have tested it. They would have found bone. So I find that really disturbing. And a lot of people. Now, I want to talk about the bullet that they found a month later. And I've talked to people about this, and a lot of people don't put a lot of weight. Like, I don't think they realize how serious that is that this bullet that supposedly killed David shows up magically a month later after all these people that were in the investigation missed it. And then all of a sudden somebody walks in and they look up and they see it. Do you find that that's a huge deal, right? That they found it a month later?
Well, that's the backbreaker of this case in my mind.
Yes.
It's the backbreaker because what they did, the police, right, wrong, or indifferent, once again, saw 3 dead bodies at the scene, removed the bodies, and saw 3 bullets, bullet fragments. And so they said, oh, there's one for each, problem solved. There was one in the basement floor, one that was shot down that went into the basement and stuck in a wall that wasn't mushroomed out because it hit something. Right. And so they find 3, and these are hollow point bullets, by the way, from a .40 caliber handgun. They're going to mushroom out. They're meant to kill. This is like
for sure
gangster weapons. Yep. This is not just someone having a gun at home to protect themselves. So hollow points is what were used. And so they found 3 of the bullet fragments. They found 3 bodies. They shipped them out as a done deal. It was 2 days later, the very same day I created my justice page, the cleaning crew was in and rolled up a rug in the living room to start cleaning the floor, and a bullet fragment fell out of the rug. It was shot into the ground. We find out later it was through Comel's back of her head and had her blood and brain matter on that bullet. So that she was shot twice. And then we find another bullet that they do the testing on, which they thought was David's, and that was Comel's also.
Correct.
So there's evidence, whether people believe it or not, that she was shot 3 times. We know she was shot twice. 2 or 3 times had bullets mushroomed out of gunshots in the back of her head, blowing her head away, that she was shot 2 or 3 times. Now, we already can take a professional hit out. That's going to be one shot. Professional hit, assassin, a hitman. 2 or 3 times, now you got emotion involved. You got some kind of emotion and overkill. So that's wrong. The problem is they do the test and find out they're all from Comel.
All 3.
The other one's from Rania.
Yeah.
Well, there's no bullet from David at this point. Now, allegedly, he shot himself with his right hand in his head, but the gun was laying next to his left hand, and his right hand was missing. Did the dog eat it? Was it chopped off? Was it cut off? We don't know. The hand was missing. He couldn't have shot himself unless something happened later, but his hand was missing. There's no bullet. So the cleaners are there the 19th. They're rolling up the carpet. This thing falls out. They call the cops. They come back, and they say, yes, we're going to take this into evidence, introduce this into the case, and put this in the case. Thanks for doing this. Now continue on with your cleaning. February rolls around, and they get to talking to a guy that says, why were you there on the 19th when a 911 call was made to the home? 19th. Same day my justice page was created, same day the cleaners were there, a neighbor calls 911 to say there's suspicious activity at that house. There should be no one in the house except the cleaners. Mm-hmm. Well, they find out there's no one there, but a couple people were moving some stuff and doing some things inside the home. What?
That's crazy.
Getting some things ready, moving some things, cleaning, organizing up. Why would anyone be in that house? Well, it turns out they said this Chris Klein was in the house, and it was his truck that was seen driving away. They interviewed Chris Klein, and he says, well, this February 18th, a month later, he calls police and says, I was in the house because we're investigating the bullet that was in the ceiling. Detectives say, what bullet in the ceiling? They say, oh, in the living room, right where the killings took place, David must have shot himself like this, and it went up into the ceiling and bounced around, and it's in the attic. That's what we're looking for. And they're saying, we couldn't believe that you guys missed this. How could you miss the most important bullet there was? They said, we didn't know there was a bullet until now. But the bigger question is, how did you know that we didn't know? So the conclusion is, or the hypothesis is, and this is a well-oiled hypothesis, is that the gun shot into the ceiling was done after the fact, possibly on the 19th, by the perpetrators, because they realized they had not left a body, the bullet that killed David Crowley in the house. You need to have the bullet before you can close the crime. Well, Apple Valley already closed up the crime scene, shut everything down. David did it. They never had the bullet that killed David. So now it's found later in the attic. They send it to testing for forensics, and they say that the DNA, touch only, is on him of the body of David. David's touch DNA, meaning he may have loaded that bullet into the cartridge. But we look again and say, but it should have his blood. Blood should be on it, and brain matter. Nope, we went back to the lab reports, lab testing. No blood, no brain matter on a hollow point bullet that killed the killer.
Mm-hmm. No hair.
No. So there was no hair, no cells, no blood, no brain matter, no tissue, no skin, nothing. But there was touch DNA, much like a
right.
If I touch a pen or a pencil, and I leave some skin behind. You can't see it to the public, to the naked eye, but there's skin pieces left behind. So they found that on the bullet. That reason alone are people who believe that David did it, because they said they found the bullet that killed David and his DNA was on it. Case closed. we said, well, that could have been him loading the bullet, touching or handling the bullet.
Exactly.
The bullet fragment, mushroomed, because it's a hollow point. When it goes through the skull, it mushrooms up and collects and screws through up into the ceiling and collects and takes the brain matter up with it, with blood, tissue, everything is going to be lodged into that thing. Well, some say it was fired so fast it all must have fallen off. It went through the ceiling roof. The sheetrock, it must have come off.
I've heard that.
Bounced around in the attic and was laying on top of the insulation in the attic. Somehow it must have come off. Well, police go there February 19th. You get a search warrant to go back into the house with the search warrant to check the attic. They go up and they find it. They bring it back and find it. They said, once again, we got to add this to evidence, bring this into the case and submit it for forensic testing and whatnot. So this took, before everything was said and done, it was a year before all the analysis and everything was done. So the answer is this. There's no bullet that killed David in that house. The bullet that did kill David has never been recovered. The bullet that killed David, whoever did it, hitman, amateur, assassin, whatever, I'm guessing also has that as a trophy. It was picked up and taken from the scene, much like Rania's arm and the hands. Now, the dog wouldn't have eaten the bullet. The dog wouldn't have eaten the arm. And there's no bullet that killed David until one that was introduced later. To the crime scene.
Yeah.
That now is a tampered crime scene. The crime scene has now been tampered because it's not been secured the entire time. Meaning if this was a court case and David was still alive and he was tried for the murder of these two individuals, this case would be, that bullet would be not admissible.
Exactly.
Found a month later. So the case would be thrown out. There's no way David, if he would have been alive and survived the killing and was charged for this, that he would even be found guilty of any of this because there's no evidence to support he did anything. Remember the handgun, no fingerprints. David Crowley's fingerprints are not on the handgun. The bigger question is nobody's fingerprints are on the handgun.
That's what I thought.
Well, fingerprints would be all over a handgun, from the purchaser, the seller, from the salesman at the store to people using it, handling it, testing it. So it's been wiped down. Why would a gun be wiped down if it was used in a commission of a suicide?
Right.
So number one, nothing adds up. And so there's 3 dead bodies. Comel shot 3 times. You got overkill. Rania shot once. Her arm is missing. David shot once. His right hand is missing. He was right-handed. And some say the only way to do the test that he fired that gun would be a gunshot residue.
Yep. GSR.
Gunshot.
Yeah. GSR.
GSR test, because there would be residue on his hand that fired the weapon. Therefore, whoever did the perpetration of the crimes removed the hand so they could never tie it back. Now, he wasn't left-handed, but the gun was laid by his left hand. So you have to look at the mistakes made along the way by the perpetrators. Government hit would be
Sorry,
simple.
go ahead.
No mistakes. A amateur killing, a lot of mistakes, a lot of overkill.
Mm-hmm.
Someone must have had some issue with Comel to be shot 3 times. And we know by looking at the wall, Allah Akbar, a Quran on the floor, and a message saying, open the Quran and follow the Quran, Islam.
Right.
And so we already know that there was someone who committed all these other staging. The Muslim angle staging of the scene was probably the one that killed Comel by shooting her 3 times. Someone had a very big hatred to Islam that was tied to this. David didn't have an anti-Islam slant. Comel, whether she was still Muslim or was she's Christian or converted or whatever, there was no. It was made to look like an honor killing, is what many people think.
Mm-hmm.
And so that also was staged because people of the Islamic faith would say you would still never do these things.
Right.
Allah Akbar written on the wall in blood, kind of like a Charlie Manson kind of a thing, would still be written. Never in English would you write that Allah Akbar in the English language. It would be the Arabic writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So not to say that the killers were idiots, but the killers made enough mistakes in that home that one can easily come to the conclusion that someone did it. So now you just have to look at means, motive, and opportunity. Those are three things to solve a crime. The Gray State guys had the means. They had the weapons. They had access to the house. They were friends with these guys. They probably got let in. Who knows? They had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to do so. They were doing nothing else. These guys don't work. And they needed the money. The script is what they got, and the script is what they needed. But the only way to get the script is to get David and, most importantly, and his remaining heirs out of the way to have that script land in their lap to be able to move forward with it. $30 million for people looking to make some money. That felt shafted by David being too, taking the ball and running with it.
For sure.
He was too selfish. So they added, so you got the means, motive, and opportunity. A very elementary detective crew could probably solve this crime. The folks on our justice page are all volunteers. We all come from different backgrounds. None of us are police detectives. Mm-hmm. And I think we've solved it. So the problem is, does Apple Valley Police not want to reopen it because it's going to make them look bad? Are they going to look embarrassed because they just got done telling the community that the killers are not at large, when in fact for 7 years they have been and still are?
That's a good point. And
showing photos to neighbors of the bodies. I mean, now you're getting a little out there. And so the only thing that comes all this together is that these guys are so forward and so brash with everything. It almost leads one to believe that they feel that they're never going to get into trouble for this, which means that there must be some complicity on the police department side. There must be some complicity somewhere that someone's got their backs. And so it has come raise the possibility of, are some of these guys confidential informants? Are they working with the feds? Are they federal agents? Were some people hired by the feds to infiltrate David's group and ended up killing the family because they knew nothing would ever come of it? And they went rogue. That's the considerations we're thinking of here, because you wouldn't be that brash if there's a chance you'd get busted for it. But you also wouldn't care if you knew someone would have your back and you would never get busted for it. Even if the case was reopened, you'd never get busted. That's the problem we're at right now. It does seem that there's federal agents, there's bad guys, there's corrupt, and there's federal informants into this mix somehow that are keeping this whole thing under the surface, is what it seems like. Now that's the kind of the conspiracy guy in me coming out, but that's the only plausible reason I can think of that people would be that brash and talking about it, and coming after me. You're making threats. We've received threats on this case. If David did it, why would there be a need to threaten anyone in a case like this?
Right, and I have talked to a few people, and I found that quite shocking, actually, when I started doing interviews, that the people I interviewed said that they had been getting threats. And I was like, you're actually getting threats for just asking questions and researching a case? And they're like, yeah, we get threats all the time. So I found that very shocking. And I just like the way you brought it up, because I was trying to, when you were saying like for means and motive and stuff, and I was thinking, why would the police be in on this blocking? Like, why? Like, that's one question I've had all along, is why would the police be protecting anybody? And you really made a good point when you said, what if they're informants, or what if there was some agencies informing David's little group there because of the project he was doing? And then that kind of clicked. It made sense. Like, that would be a good reason why the police are keeping this case shut and why they're protecting people. That actually does make a lot of sense the way you laid it out like that.
Yeah, and the thing we've been seeing in society recently, and it started out with, the Occupy movement was real big, and they started off clean and doing the right thing. And then it got spun when infiltrators got involved with it. The Occupy movement, the Black Lives Matter movement actually was very clean when that started too, but then that got infiltrators instigators and infiltrators that are paid to just cause disruption. And that whole thing went by the wayside. And so the Gray State project, the Gray State team that David was on, certainly would have been something that people would have been paid for, to place informants in there to kind of get some listening, hear what's going on, and see where this project is headed, and being paid for it. These guys never had cash. They didn't have jobs, but they're at all the events, all the meetings, all the filmings, all the documentaries without having jobs. So you have to ask yourselves, what was their source of income? What was their source of income? And there wasn't any. So if you are an informant and if you're paid under the table in the form of cash or something, you're going to have cash on you. You're not going to have a job, but you're also not going to be cashing checks because you're going to be living on cash. So these guys all seem to have cash and money with them and on them, but they never were wealthy and they never had jobs. And so some have speculated, including myself, that a number of these folks were federal informants to begin with. Now, if their federal informants got into trouble, who would come in? Their boss would come into the Apple Valley Police Department, a small little local police department, and say, you know what, brush this case away. There's stuff that involves us, and we are going to look bad if it comes out, so shove it aside. That could easily be done if the Apple Valley police chief was compromised in such a way that got a talking to, a tap on the shoulder by someone at the federal level to say, make this case go away. Officer Reitzagel would be one to say, sounds good, I'll do that. That's how the chain of command works. The job isn't to, hey, let's solve the crime, because I am a civil servant and I work for the city of Apple Valley. The job is always, if someone higher up tells me something above my pay grade, I'll do it. It's a chain of command, much like the military.
Yeah.
And once I found that out from police, and I'm like, yeah, but you still take an oath. That's different. Well, the oath goes out the window if you get told to do something from above. So
exactly.
Feds came in and told the department heads to squash the case. There could very well be good-meaning detectives on the case doing what they thought was good. They wouldn't be told, hey, we're supposed to squash this case. That would be only to very few people would be limited to be hearing that information. And the underlings certainly wouldn't.
Well, that's what I was telling people too, because I've had people say the same thing to me. They're like, so you're telling me that everybody in the investigation is corrupt and they all know what's going on? And I said, no, that's not the way it works. It only takes somebody higher above you to come in and say, this is what's going to go down. This is what you're going to say. And then they will go along with it because, as you said, chain of command. Now, do I think that everybody in the Apple Valley Police Department is in on this and covering it up, like, willingly? No, I don't think that at all. I actually do try to kind of believe that some of them probably agree that this is not a murder-suicide and that something happened and that this was made to look that way. But when you have your pension on the line, your job on the line, you want to take care of your family, you got bills to pay, you have a higher up come along and say, this is what I want you to write down, this is what I want you to say, this is the narrative I want you to push, you're going to do it. It's just the truth.
Unfortunately, it's the sad, ugly truth that is the way it happens. And if you were to, if one was to ask me, I would say that there's two, maybe no more than three people in the Apple Valley Police Department that know the true deal with this case, not the true case of what actually happened, but to know that someone up above said, squash this thing, shut it down. I also believe that there's good, hardworking people down below the chain doing their jobs. Now, in this case, it may have been bad.
Right.
I'm not saying they did a good job. I'm saying they did a bad job, but it may still have been a well-meaning. They may have put their best foot forward. The city of Apple Valley averages one homicide a year.
Wow.
One. So these guys are chasing down traffic tickets and speeders and drugs and assaults and domestics. They're not used to handling murders or dead bodies even, but they're not handling murders and homicides. Now to land a scene with a triple homicide in one house, they're obviously over their heads. And so the first question would be, typically you ask for assistance, a neighboring department, the county department, the state, someone to help you out. And Apple Valley quickly says, no, we'll handle this ourselves.
Right.
That was another indicator to me that they were told, I think, from the very beginning to make this go away.
Right, and which would also make sense why they said in 2 hours.
Whether everyone's involved or two people involved, Apple Valley Police Department is involved in a cover-up, if you ask me.
Right, and it does make sense why they pushed the narrative after 2 hours that it was a murder-suicide. And I've had also people say they didn't just say that in 2 hours. They took a whole year to look at evidence and come to that conclusion. But I've read reports where they were saying that within a couple hours, there's reports of the police saying that it looks like a murder-suicide. It's not just people saying that. Well,
here's where it got confusing, because I've done the same research. They concluded that it was a double murder suicide.
Mm-hmm.
After a year's, they came out officially and said that, but they were operating under the assumption from the very beginning that it was a double murder suicide.
Exactly.
My question is for any, and the research that I've done in the last 6 years here is every homicide detector goes into a case assuming that it is a murder. And then you got to start backing in the answers to prove that it's a suicide, because many suicides are staged to look like murders. Your goal is to treat it as a homicide, right? Until the evidence comes in that supports that possibly it was a suicide. Even if they're told it looks like a suicide, your detective, you come in, the blinders are not on.
Right.
These guys had blinders on from the beginning, and that backed into the evidence that supported David did it, and they thought they had enough, and they closed the case, done deal. But they should have said, thanks for letting us know that you think it's a suicide, but we'll investigate this as a homicide until the evidence proves otherwise. And they unknowingly, they didn't do that. They did treat it right off the bat that David did it. Imagine going into that basement and seeing tons of ammunition and police coats, police vests, ammunition, guns, weapons, that they thought this guy was a nutcase.
Right.
But he just shut down that business that he was selling used equipment and had a garage sale in September of 2014 to sell, I think, $5,000 worth of goods. And what he had left was in the basement, and he still hadn't gotten rid of that yet. But he looked like a nut job to the average Joe. They found marijuana in the house. They said this guy was probably just a nutcase.
Right. And they go with that narrative. And if you have the blinders on, if you think that after a couple hours, you're not really looking at all the evidence and trying to look at all of it. I find it even strange that I found that there's like a lot of samples that have never been tested. Like they tested, I think there was like 38 samples taken. I'm not sure the exact number. I've read a lot of documents in the last couple of weeks, but I do know that there's less than half that have been tested. A lot of the blood samples were never tested. And that's another thing that really bothers me, Dan, is that blood that was on the recliner is nowhere near somebody who put it there. And they never tested the blood on the recliner. There's so many things in this case that don't make sense why they didn't test it. I still don't get it.
Well, that's a very good point. And the folks following it, there's a recliner in the living room that with the arm will bend it back and the seat will come up and then recline and go back down, fold back down. But there's a big wet spot of blood soaked. It looked like it had been sitting there for hours.
Yep.
Was never tested. There was no body by it. So we already knew the body or bodies were moved. At least one of them was moved. I don't know who that was, but it would have been nice to get testing done. Now we do see the reports, the emails going back and forth with the lab saying, we've got the completion done of the handwriting analysis. Would you like us to do further? And Apple Valley writing back saying, no, that's all we need at this time. We have no interest in taking a deeper dive. The ballistics, would you like us to take the next level, deep dive into the ballistics? No, we have what we need. So many times on the correspondence, we see them declining or saying no to follow-up on the forensics. When the other investigation, when the other agency is asking, would you like it? We'll provide it to you. No, we're good. So that, to me, raised a big red flag because you would, in a case like this, a triple homicide in your small town. Apple Valley has 40,000 people. It's not a small town, but it's not a big city either. I would have said, you're going to test everything, and we're going to exhaust every resource to find out who did this.
Right.
And right away, the first week, we see them saying, no, we have what we need, that we're good. And so I think that is, once again, either the report being squashed from above to say we don't want further stuff, or we're going to try to save some money. These things are expensive to do, or we're not interested in the truth. We're just going to go through the motions of getting what we need to close this case, put a big bow on it, and consider it done.
Right. And that's true. And then another part of the investigation I find strange is that when they are testing some of the samples, there is another major contributor that is found in the blood, and they never hunted that down. I think that's really, I don't get it. I don't understand when there's another contributor, from what I'm understanding. I hope I'm reading that right. You're reading it right, because
that makes
when they do no sense.
When they do the analysis, remember there's 3 people in the house,
yep,
according to the official narrative, 3 people in the house, and they get the blood back and they do the blood work and say that it's not this person, it's not this person, but it is this person and another person. but they've ruled out Rania and Kamel. We think it's David, but the blood also contains DNA from another individual. Well, that to me would be a huge red flag if I was a detective. Exactly. Or the sergeant of the detective unit or the police chief of Apple Valley. I would say, well, by God, whose is it?
Right.
That's the answer.
And
why is there a source of blood from someone else not in that home anyway? There wouldn't be. So they've already got themselves painted into a corner with all of these things. And these are all facts that we've pointed out. It's not us making things up.
Yeah, you can read. I'm just going by what I've read on the reports.
You can read it. So why wouldn't they want to reopen the case? I can see, why. It's going to be embarrassing. It's going to be expensive, and they've probably been told that it's not going to happen to begin with. So they were careless in some of those items.
Right.
This case will never be reopened. Our only hope in this entire case is, as people from the Apple Valley Police Department retire, quit, leave, move agencies, go somewhere else and retire, and they're no longer affiliated with them, is for them to come forward and do interviews like this, even if it's anonymous. You don't have to give your name, just to say, you know what, I worked in the case and things were fishy. I worked in the case and things didn't add up. You can certainly come forward from that perspective. If there's a federal person involved pushing all this down, I don't think you'll get anyone to come forward.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing right now. No one, not a soul, has come forward in this case, which leads me to believe there's some federal interference in here at some level from the feds.
Right. And now this is a question I wanted to definitely ask you too. I know you've interviewed a lot of people with this case and have you ever spoke to anybody in David's family about this and what they think, or Kamel's family? Like, who have you spoke to any of these people, like, and just got what they think? Do they think he did it? Do they believe the narrative? Do they have doubts? You don't hear much about David's side of the family talking about it.
One thing that was odd for us in this whole case was the lack of a media statement or a press release from the family. Now, David's parents are divorced. And so police had to meet with David's father on one hand and then the mother on the other hand, because they were not together. They're still on good terms, but they were separated, so it caused kind of a tough thing to do. So we haven't heard anything. Now, I was able to speak with Kamel's father, her dad, and talk to him on the phone. And the mother has since died. She was suffering from cancer for many years, subsequently died. But they were going through this whole issue when she was still in hospice care, and the attention was focused on that. But the father did tell me directly that if I did have extra money sitting around and I wasn't at my wife's bedside, I would hire an investigator to look into the discrepancies in this case. And he didn't have the wherewithal to do that. Maybe he will now, I don't know. I talked to the sister. She now subsequently thinks that David did do it. But I think there's pressure there to say that as well.
Right.
And so, she had been one that was kind of on the fence, and then she made a trip to Minnesota and ended up meeting with all the Gray State guys, the whole team, and then came away and flew back home and landed in Texas. And every comment since then has been that David did it, is all we hear from her. So I think they got to her at some point to believe now that he did do it. But it's goofy. I haven't talked to David's father. I am inclined to believe that he is direct or indirectly related to this killing itself, I think. I've been on record saying that, and I do believe that David's older brother, Dan Jr., is directly or indirectly involved with this murder as well. Wow. So when you get family members involved with the murder, remember, they were the ones closest. They had the most to gain from this, and they also had the most to lose. And so we don't hear anything from him, because if they open up their mouths, only bad things can happen. So they're not going to talk. I don't believe the sister has anything to do with anything. She's living in another state. But it's David's father and son that were in on that strange $50,000 cash withdrawal at a bank in October of 2014 that came from the father's trust account. And so we were able to access, my background is accounting, and I'm have an accounting degree. So I'm looking at this case from a financial aspect, who can gain, who can lose. And so therefore I went after that $30 million contract. That was all fuzzy. And I interviewed the producer directly, and he confirmed that they did have a contract.
Okay.
On record, it was. And they said, no, it was canceled. He walked away from it. There was no truth to that. We've got that on a YouTube video confirming that that did took place. And then we got from the Wells Fargo Bank records that the father had a joint trust account for the kids. So when he dies, in the event that he dies, it's a POD account, that the money in this account, $200,000 or $300,000 in this account, would be split evenly among the kids when he dies. It was a payable on death account only, meaning no one could touch the account unless the father was dead. Well, the father's alive and still alive, but we see a withdrawal taken in October of 2014 for a straight even $50,000 cash, not a cashier's check, not a traveler's check, not a check, but cash. So someone had to walk into that bank, walk into that branch location in October and say, I want some cash. And a teller filled it out and gave it to him. Now, the only problem we have with this is that David's father is an engineer and travels a lot for business. He testified to police that the entire month of October that year, he was in Germany on business. Okay. This withdrawal was taken from a local bank branch in Minnesota in October. So either the father's lying or someone else took out the money instead. Now, Dan Jr., the older brother of David, that's his name. It's Daniel Crowley Jr.
Right.
But that's his name. If he went into that bank and showed identification and said, I want to make a withdrawal and get it, he could have gotten it. The problem with that, if you set that aside, what's 50,000 got to do with it? Who cares? Well, the thing that pops into my mind is if you're talking on a typical hit assassination, maybe $10,000 to $15,000 a hit is what it costs. 50,000 would fall right in line with the triple homicide for what it would cost to pay a hitman, right?
Right.
So I let that go, no big deal. I start looking for the financials for that money to come back in, meaning the son needed it, one of the daughters needed it, another family member needed the money quickly, and then when dad got home from October, made a deposit and put it back in. Well, the subsequent records for the next 3 months show no deposit of 50,000 coming back in.
Okay.
So someone needed 50,000 for something in the months leading up to a triple homicide that we can't account for. Now, did the Apple Valley Police Department investigate why there's $50,000 missing from a bank account from the old man who's in Germany, but the bank withdrawal was done at a branch office for $50,000 cash in Minnesota? Now, the signed signature looks like, to me, and we did the handwriting analysis, it looks like Dan Crowley Jr. forged his father's name on the slip to get the money. His name is there. His signature is on the slip that we have. It lines up with other signatures that Dan Jr. has made. It does not resemble a signature from Dan Sr. Makes sense. Dan Sr. was out of the country. He couldn't have done that withdrawal.
Right.
The question is, why is Dan Crowley Jr. withdrawing $50,000 for anything? He wasn't running a business. He wasn't buying a house. He wasn't buying a car. He wasn't starting up his own business. There was no, I don't know why $50,000 would need to be taken out, but it certainly piques my interest when 2 months later, 3 bodies are dead, including Dan Jr.'s script landing in his lap, the one who took out the $50,000, because the remaining heirs are killed. Was he involved in getting that money to hire the folks to do the killing? Maybe so, maybe not, but it hasn't been explained satisfactorily by anybody where this money went. Now, if Dan Sr. comes home from Germany, finds out there's money missing, and his son is now killed 3 months later, is he going to bring up his other son to authorities to say, you know what, I think he committed forgery on a bank statement?
Right.
He may think, well, I already lost one son. If I charge my other son, he'll be in prison for a long time. How about I just let it all go by the wayside and just keep it quiet and not say anything about it to save at least one of my sons? That's the thinking that most people have in our group, that Dan Sr., the father, knows more about the case and won't let on. Because if he does let on, he's only going to hurt himself and his own family more. If it comes out that the own brother was involved in the killing, do you know how that's going to look to the family and all these family and friends and relatives in the state of Minnesota and the Apple Valley Police, that the brother was involved in killing a 5-year-old niece?
Exactly.
So
yeah.
we've got a whole scenario of bad layers going down a hill, snowball, that I think Dan Sr. stepped back and says, you know what, I'm going to end it right here, not say anything to anyone, and just let it go with David did it and let it just go down that avenue. So I think he pushed it off as saying he did it, although he himself knows David probably did not.
Right. Yeah, no, I've always wondered that, like, because I did. That's why I asked you about if I've ever heard, if you've ever talked to anybody in the family, because they're very silent. Like, at least from what I can tell, I've never seen a video where they've got an interview and talked to people about what's going on. And the the last part that I wanted to bring up, the lack. When I look at the crime scene photos, which strikes me as odd, when I first started looking at them, and you kind of hit it on it at the beginning, is where's all the blood? Like, isn't there, like, for the damage to these bodies, you think there would be blood everywhere? And I mean, I've never been in a murder scene. I don't know what they look like. But I'm just logically thinking, where is all this blood that they wrote on the wall with? And the only blood I can really see is some droplets. There is some blood around a little bit, but no big pools of blood around the bodies. There's no blood around the head areas. There's like, don't you find that strange? Like, what is your guys' thought on that?
Well, I find that extremely strange. And like you pointed out earlier, the most blood I can see in that living room is on the cushion of the recliner.
Exactly.
No one's up against that. No one's head is leaning up against that. There's no body leaning up against that. That's the most blood I see. Now, the speculation is that the dog was thirsty with no water in the house and lapped up all the blood. Or it soaked into that living room carpeting. It soaked in to the carpet, all that blood, and it went away. Well, maybe true or not, I would still expect to see large pools of blood with a violent killing in that fashion done in that home. Mm-hmm. A 40 caliber gun, you're going to see splatter on the ceiling.
For sure. Right.
On the walls everywhere. And what we do see is a little bit of blood spatter, but it appears to be medium velocity blood spatter in different directions, as if someone was beat or tortured or hit with an instrument, a bat, a hammer, a tire iron, something like that. It looks like medium velocity, not high velocity. If a weapon was used as a gun to kill all these people, all you should see, if you were the Apple Valley police detectives, you should have evidence of high velocity blood spatter throughout that house.
Right.
There is no high velocity. There's a little bit of blood spatter, but it's medium velocity, meaning someone was alive when you were beating the hell out of them or something on the floor in that living room. So a torture or something did take place in that living room, but we don't know if the murders took place in that living room because, like you said, the amount of blood. Now, the blood writing on the wall, they did test, and that was Comel's. So once again, whoever did this, the hatred of Islam, Muslim, Comel, overkill 3 times, blood on the wall, Quran opened, and that's, I think, where the perpetrators made their mistake. If they would have just shot everyone evenly, left the bodies, it would have been probably an open and shut case. I wouldn't even be here 7 years later talking about it. But it's because of the mistakes that the perpetrators made is why I'm here.
Right, and that is funny. That's why I think that when we talk about it being staged, that's when I first started looking into the case. That's the one thing my brain kept going to, is like, why is it so staged looking? Like, it just, to me, they threw everything they could at the wall to see what would stick. They're like, we're gonna put writing on the wall, we're gonna leave a little note on the computer, we're gonna have the music playing in the background, like the playlist going on the computer, which I think is weird in itself again. And all of this stuff, and then there a little bit of, like, there was blood from what I can understand from the crime scene photos, there was some blood droplets in the kitchen area that were never tested. To me, I'm like, well, okay, like, why did you not test that blood in there? That could be from the killer, or even it could be from David or someone else, to prove it either way. And to me, I just find it very staged, even with the marijuana. Like, I do smoke marijuana, and I have a grinder, and I've never ground up marijuana and had it like a pile in the grinder sitting on a table like that. To me, it looks very staged, and that's just where my brain went right from the start.
Yeah, it was set up to make it look like David was the bad guy.
Right,
with
right.
all that gear in the basement, the marijuana, the goofy books that he had, and the things that he was researching, and the things that he read. David was a very well-read man, including religions and everything. So, and But the one thing they point out is, oh, the book Satanic Verses was on the shelf, so therefore maybe he did this. Well, he was very into Salman Rushdie and some of the teachings and things that he had done and well researched. Very intelligent guy. So he had books of all sorts of religions, but he wasn't for or against anything as far as I know. He was a very open guy who was raised Christian, raised Lutheran. But the other strange thing about this whole case before we leave is, I wanted to talk to David's mother.
Right.
The only one that I felt interested in talking with. In reading the reports, she's the only one in the 94-page police report that says, I can't believe my son did this. I can't, unless it was some kind of a pact.
I've heard that theory too, a pact theory.
She's the only one to doubt it. But that August of that same year, her body was found dead outside of her home in her back patio with no real reasons given for that. And if she was having an inkling as to something wasn't sitting right, and it may have taken place with my own family members, she would have been one to come forward with it. Right. Now she's conveniently dead. They buried her with no real fanfare. And so there's 4 members of the Crowley family dead to this day.
Wow.
Sad.
It is. That's what I want to end with. It's a sad story all the way around. Whether David did it or didn't do it, like I've said that in a lot of times in other interviews, that whether he did it or didn't do it, it's definitely a very evil act that took place, and a child lost their life. It's very sad. Like, it really is. And when I look into this case, it's really hard because it's very disturbing. And and as I keep saying, whether he did it or not, that's for, people to decide on their own when they look at the evidence. But it was just a very sad case. And I think it was, in my opinion, I don't understand why they didn't do certain things in this investigation and that. And I kind of agree with you that I don't think it's ever going to get answered unless somebody that's done it came forward, which I don't think is going to happen, and say we did it. And unless they can get it open some other way. But I really do hope it does get open someday again and looked at again. And the other evidence that they have tested, like they will get it tested because they do have other samples. And I think that would maybe answer a lot. In my opinion, just me, Dan. I mean, it's a big case. It really is. And I want to thank you for taking the time and coming and speaking with me. I've been wanting to speak with you for a while. And do you want to let anyone know where they can get a hold of you, or do you have a podcast they can go to, or anything like that? It's all yours.
On Twitter, my handle is DM Hennen, DM Hennen, Hennen. On Twitter, I'm out there. Also, Dan Hennen on Facebook. I've got my account out there that I'm very active on. Also, the best place is probably the Justice page. To jump on there, leave a comment, join the group. If you're hesitant to joining, you can still post and leave comments without being an actual member. But like I said, we're at 4,000 members. Our purpose there is to get the word out and to make raise the awareness of this story, whether or not it gets reopened, people get sent to jail, prison. It doesn't matter. We need to raise awareness for this poor family.
Right. I totally agree, Dan. And I can agree. Like, you can go right to that Facebook page. You can find all the documents, and you guys definitely post the evidence that you guys have. At least that's where I find all of it. And I've been reading the reports and everything. So it's very accessible, and people should definitely, I would assume you would agree with me that people should do their own research and start looking into it if they want to, read the reports themselves and everything. I think that's great advice, because you can't just take information from one person or one source. I try to think that read the reports yourself, and I really think that people, when they start reading it, they're going to find out where we're sitting, where a lot of it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. The one thing that it's very open when you see a page, especially like ours, a justice group that's out there on Facebook, is to make your own conclusions. We're not here to be a salesman. We're not here to do a sales pitch. None of us are benefiting what you believe or not. It doesn't benefit us. But if we can post, there's a section called files. Under that, we upload every time we've got some evidence, not hearsay, not theoretical things, but if there's actual evidence that it's out there, we post that in the file section. So it's a one-stop shop for all things. If you want to come to that location, that page, to do your own research, come to your own conclusions, and certainly if things come up, ask questions.
Exactly.
Everyone is out there loves to answer answer questions. And we always like the new interest that comes out there. But with 4,000 members, we're just trying to raise awareness and get the word out there about this case.
Perfect. You're doing a great job, Dan. I mean, that's how I first started learning about this was through you. So I do want to thank you once again for taking the time to come and speak with us. You're always welcome to come back. If you want to talk again about some parts of the case, you've always got an open invitation. And I want to really thank you for taking the time this afternoon to sit with me and answer some questions.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Take care, Dan, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
There we go. Another great interview wrapped up. And what a great interview that was. I really enjoyed speaking with Dan, somebody that's been looking at this case for many, many years, as you heard. And it's really, it was really cool to sit and talk to him just now and get his thoughts on it and have him here. And I definitely want to speak with other people. And I've said this in other videos. If you're on the opposing side and you want to discuss how you think David is guilty and you want to discuss the evidence, I'm not hard to get a hold of. I give my email at the end of every interview I do. Just send me an email, binthinkingpodcast@gmail.com. That's simple. binthinkingpodcast@gmail.com. And let me just double think that, because the last time I first interview, I said the address wrong. So, yeah, been thinking. Okay, so that is the correct one. And send me an email if you want to come on the show and discuss whether you think David is guilty or if you think he's innocent. I want to hear from the people that actually do think that he's guilty and that he did do this. I think that'd be a great discussion as well. And as I keep saying at the end of a lot of these interviews, is there's so much into this case when you start looking into it that it goes on. And but I do agree with what Dan said and I've said many times that you have to do your own research. I fully believe that. I think that you can't just watch a few videos by one or two people or read a few posts and then come to the conclusion accurately or with a lot of confidence. I think you should look at all the evidence, look at all the videos you can find, read all the documents. The journal is very helpful, I found, to give you a little bit of insight how the David mind worked and stuff. And I think it's I think just look at the evidence yourself is what I'm saying. Like, don't take anybody's word for it. And that was the greatest advice I took from a lot of people was don't actually get in there and start reading the documents. And some parts I have trouble understanding. I'm not a lab tech. I'm not a police officer. I'm not a forensic person. So, a little bit is hard to understand, but it's going to give you a great insight into all the evidence that they did test and what they didn't test, which has always bothered me, as I said with Dan. I just find it very weird that they would take all these samples and only test a quarter of them and not test them all. And maybe that's common in a case like this. I don't know. I'm not an investigator. Don't claim to be. But I just do find it very strange that they would not test it all. And I just find that strange. I say that a lot. And I find a lot of stuff strange in this case, actually, to be 100% honest. And just do your own research, guys, and try to come to your own conclusion. And I've been trying to stay in the middle of it, and that's the truth. And I flop back and forth, as I was saying at the beginning. One day I'm like, he did it, and then another day I'm like, no, he didn't do it. And then I'm flopping back and forth that way. It's just, as I see more evidence and read more of the documents, it just kind of something will make me lean. But no matter how many of the documents I read, there's still all these questions I have. I got a lot of problems with what wasn't done in this case and stuff, like what evidence wasn't tested, and the bullet that showed up a month later. To me, that's a big red flag to me, and it's troublesome. It's just this is a bullet that supposedly killed David, and that they say killed David, and everybody at the beginning missed it in the ceiling and missed the hole in the ceiling, and then they find it a month later. That's a big deal to me, and the lack of blood's a big deal, and not testing the blood on the recliner is a big deal. The just a lot of stuff, and I just so it's just a case that keeps me guessing. Like the more I research, it keeps my brain going back and forth, and so that's where I'm at with it. I'm basically still. The more I talk to people, I'm still in the middle. It's the way I'm leaning. I mean, I'm just definitely leaning to the side of right now that it's kind of strange that a lot of things weren't tested, like the dog feces and some, like I was saying earlier, the blood and stuff like that. Find that kind of strange, and it makes me wonder why. And so, but if you got an opposing view and you think he did do it, let's set up an interview. Let's talk about it. I love having discussions, as I keep telling people, and it's the truth. I really do, and I enjoy having all of you here. I want to thank you for taking the time. It was kind of a long interview, but I thought it was a great interview, and it was worth taking some time because I really wanted to speak with Dan, somebody who's been really digging into this case for 7 years. So I hope you enjoyed the interview. I enjoy having you all here. I really appreciate you all taking the time to watch. If you do enjoy my interviews, please give a like, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't. Figured I should say those things because I really, enjoy doing this, and I enjoy having you guys here to, sit back and, just listen to what we're chatting about, especially if it's a topic that you're interested in, which is always good. So, want to thank you all. Have a great day, great evening, and depends where you're listening, watching from. So, take care, and I'll definitely have some other great interviews coming up very shortly. And just remember, everybody's got an interesting story. Everybody. Yeah, even you. Yes, even you. And you know why it's an interesting story? Because it's your story. That's what makes it interesting. So take care, guys, and I'll see you next show.